Bienvenue and welcome to our LinkedIn Live, YouTube Live Data Masters Rendezvous for today. My name is Pierre-Adrien Ania. I'm very joyful and humbled to have guest speakers on the scene I share with to talk all around data sharing for and by the public sector. Before I give the stage and let everyone present themselves, first let me talk you the tale of data sharing in public sector. We have published a few months ago a report that you can read, Connecting the Dots, which is all around the value of mastering information-led environment in very complex societies we live in. Information becomes knowledge and actionable knowledge if we master data ecosystem, if we transform the information that is out there with open data, with the data that sits within organizations, but also flows from one to another. If we transform that into an ecosystem of players, technologies, and actions to tackle complex issues such as climate change or, a pandemic, we will talk about that, I'm sure, with the force and power of data. In that report, we came to a lot of key insights. And actually, I took some notes about the numbers that were shown during the 30 seconds trailer, because that gave me some food for this very introduction. First, everyone agrees data ecosystem makes sense and data ecosystem bring benefits. 71% realized reduced costs, 76% improved decision-making, and 79% improved citizen experience. So you really have those benefits across department. That's very important when we talk about public sector. We have this variety, heterogeneity of mandate having organizations such as armies, hospitals, public procurement, but also tax and welfare agencies across borders. And the good thing actually is we are not in competition with each other. All those exist next to each other and can cooperate on the value of data. Second, once that we have said that there is a compromise about the benefits, we have to acknowledge that only 10% have fully deployed data ecosystem yet. Basically, that means that there is still homework to do, both on the public and the private side, but also with new stakeholders, maybe such as citizens or startups. And the good news is the study shows 73% are actually planning stage. So it's really coming, and it's a topic that we will discuss here in very different maturity level and with very different criticality levels. Last but not least, and there I come to the challenge, we have acknowledged there are benefits. We are acknowledged there is a way to get there. But what is today the challenge of applying and deploying data ecosystems? On the one hand, of course, the homework is technological one, and the legacy modernization, interlock with cloud, and so on and so forth. But the technologies exist. We have federated learning, we have data mesh, we have new data architectures that are decentralized and give us the opportunity to tackle that reality and that wish. We also have privacy preserving data analytics that enables to anonymize. But one of the core challenges to apply it on the one hand, and the other core challenge that we see in the report is all in regard to the human. It comes back to the human in very simple ways. The one that has to apply it, the one that has to trust in it, from borders to hospitals, home care apps, and so on and so forth. We have seen and witnessed a lot of public organizations dealing with that issue of trust, with that challenge of making data sharing an understood reality. So all that is what we will talk about today. I'm very happy to do so with three guest speakers to take the stage. Teresa Girbal, Scott Hield, and Gianfranco Cecconi. I would now go one by one and ask you to introduce yourself, but also the organization that you represent, starting with Teresa Girbal. Let's go south to Portugal. You are CIO of ESPAP, the entity of shared services of public administration. Can you elaborate and tell us more?
Thank you, Pierre. Exactly. I'm Teresa Girbal from ESPAP. I'm from Portugal, from ESPAP, which is the entity of shared service for the public administration. The shared services company, ESPAP, is doing mainly shared services in four major areas. in the financial area, like accounting, national budget management, and also electronic invoice. Human resources shared services, so we do the core HR and payroll and also evaluation systems, and we do public procurement also. So we have shared service in procurement, and last but not least in ITC. So we also have shared services in infrastructure services and also applications, which is developing and maintenance application. Also as PUP, and I think it's important to refer this to this conversation, we are a member of the ITC committee in Portugal, the government entity that agency that connects all the ministers. So in that committee, we define policies and strategies related to the digital or ITC. So this is also, I will talk in both heads. Okay.
Perfect. Merci. And I pronunciated your last name like a German, so I will work on my Portuguese. Now heading to Scotland, and here I will definitely not be able to bring my Scottish up that I don't have. Scott Heald, you are Director of Data and Digital Innovation at Public Healthcare Scotland. Can you elaborate and tell us more?
Yeah, thanks very much. And it's great to be here, and welcome from Edinburgh. It's pretty cold here, actually. And just to say, I'm on my 4G, and I'll explain all about that later when we talk about the aftermath of COVID. So hopefully my connection holds throughout the call. So yeah, great to be here. I work in an organisation called Public Health Scotland, and we are Scotland's national public health agency. We were actually created back in April 2020. With the kind of aim and ambition of leading and supporting Scotland to respond to some of its health challenges. I'll maybe touch on some of that later, with a real focus on making a difference to people who live in our communities. So just to set the scene, that Scotland has one of the worst life expectancies in Europe. And one of the missions of Public Health Scotland is to try and reverse that. And I'll talk about how we use data to try and affect that change later on. Just to highlight that data is at the heart of the organisation. So we are one of the biggest employers of statisticians, data managers, analysts, architects in Scotland. We've got about 1,100 people working in this space. And we are what's called the custodians of Scotland's national health and care data, which means that the majority of the health and care data in Scotland resides with Public Health Scotland. And that gives us an amazing opportunity to do great things with the data that we hold about health and care. And I've got some really good examples I'll share with you later. And obviously, Public Health Scotland was created just at the point that COVID hit. Some people in Scotland think we were created to deal with COVID. It was actually planned before that, and the first 3 years of our life has all been about dealing with COVID. But there's been some great learning around data and digital in all of that, which I'll hopefully touch on as we go through the day. Just to say, I'm a statistician by trade, so that's my background. Thank you.
Perfect. Merci. And to close the round, let me give the stage to an Italian living in the Netherlands. Gianfranco, you are lead for collaborative data ecosystems at Capgemini. What does that mean?
Thank you, Pierre. And yeah, of course, I'm playing home here, so very, very happy to be with you. What does it mean? We suddenly were put at the center of the storm in a way. I've been working in data sharing as a practitioner for almost 10 years, but it was almost a bit of a niche thing, right? And it totally became really important, and the expectations were raised so much over the last few years. So today I have the privilege, in a way, for Capgemini to support all my colleagues in understanding the topics, and of course our clients as a consequence of that. On the side, I work personally on some of the projects we run, particularly in public sector. I am a collaborator to the Data Europe.eu, the European Union program for open data, and I advise the team in Belgium that operates the Data Spaces Support Center, but we will probably go back to that later. And of course, I've been one of the authors of this report as well. So I'm very, very happy to contribute today. Back to you, Pierre.
Absolutely. And just before we move to the first question, indeed, while the panel is very European, we definitely also have and cover geographies such as Singapore, the Middle East, Australia, US, where data sharing in public sector and systems established to share the data are hugely important as well. I was discussing, for example, with National Institutes of Health in the US, or with Services Australia in Australia, where this topic is definitely of importance and rising importance as well. So while, of course, our panel is European, we also can go with the assumption that the topics we will tackle are of rising importance in other geographies of the world as well. Now, maybe coming back to indeed the three kind of pillars of the study that you participated to, really this compromise about the benefits, the challenge about applying and scaling, and a human touch of the challenge. My question to you, Teresa and Scott, would be, you have participated to the research. What are the learnings that echo your current initiatives, your work? Do you recognize your journey in those three insights? Who wants to start? Maybe we start with Teresa.
Okay, thank you very much for the question. Yes, in fact, I think I recognize our organization, and not only the organization, but also the public sector in Portugal, in maybe all the findings that you found. The reality is that the sharing is the journey. Okay, it's not just implement and it's ready. So, and of course has a lot of advantage and challenges to overcome. So, to be very honest, I believe that this journey has to, first of all, has to start by small steps, and then we grow up and get the big advantage. So it is very difficult to kind of sharing information, sharing data between the public entities or agencies. So that's why we have implemented in Portugal a policy, and we implemented in interoperability platform. So the public administrations, or the various entities that needs to share information, so use that platform. So not only implemented that, but also forced to use it. So, which is the next step. So this is easier for various entities to share information, and of course has major advantage. We not only it's faster, it's better, but it's also much more cost efficient to do that. Another thing is that we also have in the strategy, in the IT strategy for Portugal, the policy of only once. So we avoid, or we should avoid, to ask twice or more, because sometimes we ask even more in the public when we try to collect data from citizens and companies. And for different entities, we collect the same information. So public administration, public sector collects millions of data every year from citizens and companies, and a lot of that is duplicated. So having this kind of sharing data in a secure way, of course, is absolutely crucial. It's a good way, a good service that we do to the society in general, and of course, much more cost efficiency. Also in HPAP, in order to leverage that implementation of interoperability platform, we implement the internet exchange point, which means that in infrastructure basement communications, we have all the areas connected, so it's much easier to use, for example, that interoperability platform. So we're doing some steps, and this is just an example. Another example is in connection with public administration and the citizens or companies, for example. We also implemented I cannot say the word, interoperability whatever, someone help me, platform with social security and citizens and companies to communicate with them. So this is just an example. We have more. This is something that actually makes the data sharing useful, much useful and easy to get the goals.
And I truly like your point about the once only principle. I mean, we have digital government establishing huge transformation programs, the single digital gateway, the single trade gateway. A lot of governments also promising 100% of services online. And once only principle, omni-channel, interoperability is at the core of those. But they need that layer of intelligence in order to transform process efficiency into data-driven government and data decision-making. And I think here, the marriage between process efficiency and data sharing is exactly the sweet spot that we are discussing. Scott, from your side, how does the insights of the study echo your journey, your initiatives?
Yeah, no, thanks very much. It's really nice to follow Teresa because there's lots I recognise in what Teresa's been saying there. Maybe just to explain a bit about kind of how our organisation uses data and kind of how Scotland uses data. So I guess a lot of what Teresa was talking about is what I would call the kind of frontline services that are collecting data about citizens that can then be used to, in our case, run the health service, run social care. But one of the powers that we've got in Scotland is our ability to, I guess, take that data, share the data, and then for us in Public Health Scotland to use it for analysis purposes to kind of gather insights around what's actually happening across the country. So I think there's those two uses around the data sharing. One is for the kind of frontline use, and the other is then being able to use that data for analysis and research beyond that. So it's within that analysis and research space that we do a lot of our work in Public Health Scotland. Just kind of reflecting on your report and just some of my kind of observations from Scotland. We've just recently launched in Scotland a health and care data strategy, and I'm happy to share that out with the session. But one of the things that it highlights is that actually it's complex, and one of the reasons why it's complex is that there's a lot of what we call legacy systems that are out there. So lots of IT systems that have been around for many, many years, and in some cases kind of going back to the 1960s. And, so what you're not working with is a kind of modern IT infrastructure to begin with. And it's really, really important that we do the work to kind of understand where we are now, and then what are the priority actions we need to take to kind of make things better for the future. So I really like what Teresa said about, I guess, the small steps and working out where you can do the quick wins. Other key things for us around kind of that you were talking about the data ecosystem. So I think that's really important. There's also something for me about the quality of the data. And I think certainly in our organisation, we often get hung up on kind of perfection. It must be perfect before we can use it. And I think one of the learnings from COVID is that actually you can do a heck of a lot with data that's a bit more rough and ready and fast. So it's that balance between data that's quick, but can still be used for insight versus data that might take a bit longer that's perfect. And that's something that we've been doing a lot of work with over the last 3 years or so. I think the finance point is really important. So finances are tight, so we need to really think carefully about kind of where we're directing our investment and all of this. But I can see huge gains if we can properly streamline and invest in the data infrastructure. There's much greater benefits downstream. And by that, I'm talking about the fact that if we can kind of use the data to model and analyse kind of what particular interventions in health and care might look like, there can be longer term gains financially for the whole health and care system by gaining those insights from the data that we hold. So I think that there's loads that we can do in that kind of research and that analytical space. Just to touch on a couple of areas that I'm not sure if the report did go into it in detail, but one of the big areas for us as well is skills in the use of data. So both being able to attract talent into our organisations, but also, I guess, the ability of the users that we're aiming for to be able to make use of the data that we're sharing with them. So there's definitely something around all of that. And we certainly found during COVID And then it was amazing how people were able to adapt to find all the COVID statistics, because they were really keen to understand what was happening in their local areas. And that was something we hadn't seen before. So the only other point I think I would make, and I'm really jealous of Teresa's infrastructure, is that a lot of what I'm talking about is about data in the health and care system. But a lot of the drivers for public health and improving public health are things like kind of what's happening in schools, so through education data, what's happening in the justice system through data held by the police, housing, all things that impact on public health. And what we're looking to do is to bring data together across different sectors so that we can kind of understand where there might well be interventions that can be made in other sectors that might ultimately improve public health. So really keen to kind of think about how we harness data beyond health and care to improve public health in the country. So I'll maybe pause there, and we've got quite a lot of examples of, we could talk about that later, so thank you.
Perfect, merci. And Scott, I would have also already 10 things to react on, but I'm actually only the host, so I will censor myself and limit it to just say that definitely the mandate by public sector is amazing insofar that they are dealing with themselves, but in a multi-sector way. They have the mandate to cross department level and cross society level also bring an influence and an orchestration aspect in regards to the multi-sector play. So we will touch on that and definitely on some of the other points you had. Before doing so, Gianfranco, you are working all around the EU initiatives, from policymaking to supporting actions, where Capgemini was involved in on data sharing and data ecosystems. Does the study reflect on what you see from the maturity of the client and the organizations of the public sector?
I believe so. And by the way, it wasn't something that happened over the last 2 days or 3, right? So what Teresa and Scott are describing is the result almost of decades of commitment. If you just think about open data, the first public sector information directive from the EU is, I believe it celebrates 20 years this year, which is amazing. And again, it can come as a surprise to many of us, for which data sharing is still a bit of an exotic thing that we are still trying to understand. In reality, civil servants have been fighting the fight for a very long time, and they should be appreciated for that. The maturity of what you see today is the result of the journey Teresa described over these many years. And you need to understand that we are incredibly privileged, particularly in Europe, with all respect for the other countries, because we have a very good compromise, I would say, between the way the legislative framework enables us, let's say, supporting actions, the various projects that the EU runs, like the DataEuropa.eu for open data, data space support center for data sharing, the support center for data sharing before that, and so on, because all of these over time have been creating materials, training, use cases, practical demonstration of how this could happen in the real world, and combined with law, give us an amazing capital to build on top. And I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying we are going to be like this in doing more. But I'm quite happy where we stand. It's quite comfortable talking to my clients, our clients in Capgemini, to build on top of this. And we are privileged. I sincerely believe we are privileged. The focus that now we have on data sharing specifically, so the working collaboratively on data that is not easy, that is potentially confidential, describing people and their privacy and so on, so possibly actually being risky also to share, demonstrates the ambition and the courage of our civil servants and Europe, and the commitment to make this happen for real. Again, do not underestimate this. This is significant. And to a point you may say, it's not even just because it is funky or fashionable. It is because there's almost a moral obligation to do it. Collaborating, solving some of the challenges we have today cannot be done but by sharing data through the barriers, let's say, or the boundaries of different agencies, government, and beyond that, possibly also collaborating with private sector.
Perfect. In a very brief round, just talking before we will deep dive on the challenges, talking through the benefits. When we look at the free ones, improved citizen experience, increased operational efficiency, improved decision making. Scott and Teresa, do you have one where you say this is the entry point for organizations to tap into? Do you have one main benefit behind the use case as an outcome that we can achieve along also a typical use case for SPAP or for public healthcare? I'm thinking of all the responsibilities that you can have in regards to shared services, or in your case, Scott, home care, for example, or bed availability, the confinement, or the policy around the pandemic. Where do you see your main benefit behind sharing data?
It's me.
For both of you.
Sorry, Scott. Okay, again. Well, I must say that now with the head of SPAP, the thing is we are mainly back office, right? So I would select mainly the operational and decision making. Of course, citizen also, but it's indirect, right? So operation for sure, and decision making. And for example, for finance, I would just give an example on, for example, implementing we are responsible for the definition and implementation of the electronic invoice for Portugal, public administration in Portugal. So this, of course, has been not only a major cost savings. For example, we have been able to save since the implementation, and it's still not completely, but we have already saved over 30 million euros in that. So of course that is a very important achievement. Another achievement is the information we collect, for example, in electronic invoice shared with other financial systems, not only that we are, for example, in procurement, which we also are responsible for that, but also with other entities. It's a major step, not only to make it fast, better services overall, operation also, but also to take some decisions, to implement some policies like this. So I think that I could give some other examples on human resources, for example. With the shared services on human resources, we also have information and data that help a lot to take even government decisions. For example, now we're facing, I think all over, but at least in Portugal, we are facing some difficulties, for example, due to, for example, inflation and the war and whatever, you name it, right? So it's very difficult sometimes to take government decisions based on information that is not aggregated, or at least we cannot predict anything. So this, of course, help us to gather this information and, of course, kind of help the government to define policies and also to take some decisions more on real time based on that. So I think I know that the time is running out, so I would stick to this one. Thank you.
Merci. What about you, Scott?
Yeah, so probably very similar to Teresa, but I really bring in the citizen angle to all of this. I mean, one of the real reasons why, as I say, why Public Health Scotland exists is all about improving the health of the people in Scotland. So there's definitely something for me about outcomes and using data to good effect to address some of that. And one of the great abilities we've got with the data we've got in Scotland is our ability to link data together. So we can link from across the system. So I'm talking about health and care at the moment, to kind of understand kind of how people are flowing through the system in terms of their healthcare. And that gives us really good insights about kind of what's happening and what might happen if we were to change particular flows of how patients are treated. And I'll come back later just to talk about some of the work we've been doing on life expectancy and using the data to get beneath kind of what's happening there and why do we think that is, because actually there's some really good insights we can get from the data that can allow us to have targeted interventions in the country to try and improve what's going on. So I'll maybe pause there if that's okay, but the citizen part of this is really, really important. Thank you.
Yes, which is a rather good sign, I guess, with someone dealing with patients and in healthcare. So we take that as a good sign for humanity. And then going to the next, indeed, topic and key aspect, which is the challenge, because actually you challenged quite positively my introduction, Scott, by saying that at the end of the day, legacy modernization and data quality still remains a hurdle. And a key hurdle. The study also showcases indeed the hurdle that is human, change management, skills. You actually also tackled it. What needs to come first? Probably you will say both need to come at the same time now, but where could you concretize both of you again, Teresa and Scott? How does it translate into your daily work, the challenges, technological ones and human ones in data sharing? Yes.
Gosh, will I go first this time, Teresa? That's a good question. I suppose just in reflecting on it, I think it's come back to that. I think aspiring to have a perfect system is a great ambition to have, but I don't think we're ever going to get to that point, because we've got all this legacy stuff that I've talked about. But what's really, really important is that organizations like mine are tapping into expertise around kind of what can we do with current technology that allows us to do things that we might not be able to do in the past. So if I just give an example, the way our cancer data is stored across the country, there's essentially 5 centres. And in those 5 centres, they collect the data for historical reasons in slightly different ways, which actually then makes bringing it together and comparing it actually quite tricky. But through, I guess, a technique called data virtualization, in essence, what's happening now is that the cancer data remains in those 5 centres, and we've developed a virtual layer that behind the scenes in the virtual layer, it's in effect bringing the data together, attempting to standardize it so that anybody who's then analyzing that data, it looks like they're analyzing a consistent national data set. So I think there's ways we can use technology to deal with the imperfections in the system that we've got out there, and that's definitely something that we're looking to do. I think that echoes the point I was making about things don't need to be perfect. They don't always need to be consistent, because there's ways we can use technology to help us do that. So I think the whole data and digital going together is really, really important. I think the human element of it, so I didn't just think about skills and skill sets. One of the things that we recognised in Public Health Scotland is that actually, I'll use me as an example, I joined the organisation when I graduated, so this is back in 1996. I've been around for a while. And as I've got more senior and now in the role I'm in as a director, I'm by nature of the job not necessarily at the cutting edge of technology and the best way to do things. So one of the things that we've learned really quite quickly is that the partnership with the universities who are training up our graduates who ultimately join us is really, really important, kind of helping understand kind of what undergraduates have been taught. And then when they join our organisation, actually giving those individuals the freedom to actually challenge us about the way that we do things. And a lot of the kind of recent innovations we've had in terms of kind of how we do what we do has been driven by that, I guess, reverse mentoring, whereby we've listened to staff who've joined us and actually taken that on board. So one example of that is it's quite common for us up till now to use proprietary software, quite expensive, all of that good stuff. We've now moved entirely to open source software, much cheaper, and allows much more sharing of code and ideas across the country. And that was driven by a graduate joining us, questioning why we were teaching everybody a particular software, I won't name it, given they were all taught at university something quite different. So it's just something about that connection and being willing to, I guess, listen to ideas from staff to transform what we do. And I think we've been doing that pretty well in Public Health Scotland. So I hope that answers your question. It's just that let's not strive for perfection. I don't think we'll get it, but we can use technology to help us. And we need to use the skill set of the people that we've got to drive some of this forward. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. It really resonates, yes, with the unleashing aspect of data, with the innovation by iteration, thinking against themselves, because you invite more people into the round to actually help in and get engaged in an early phase, and then help to skate together. Teresa, do you want to chip in with your view?
Yeah, thank you. I think Scott has helped me a lot because he talked a lot about the technology challenge. So I will not go over that, because reality, as Pierre said in his introduction, the technology is there. Have we the money and the time and the talent to implement it? So, but yes, there is a lot of challenge in technology, especially in the public sector with all the legacy systems. So that brings additional challenge. But I will focus on the two other, which is the talent. We are facing a scarcity of talent in digital ITC. At least in Europe, we are facing it quite dramatically. From the last Digital Economy and Society Index, it says that we have around 9 million IT specialists in 22, which is by far behind what we should have, and the objective in Europe is have the 20 million in 2030. So it means that we have a lack of talent in Europe. Of course, in Portugal, we have it more because we are very competitive in price. So our resources just go to other countries where they pay more. So that's another, yes, to right there. So the reality is that we are facing this talent scarcity, and we have to focus on upskilling and reskilling as much as possible, because not only there is not enough undergraduate to join not only the public sector, but also the partners, the private companies that help us to implementing projects and doing stuff. So the reality is that we do have to do the reskilling and upskilling, and especially in this technology. But that takes time, and again, it's not done overnight. So, but it's something that we do have to do that. And also, there is in the same index, it shows that already a large amount of percentage of IT specialists or people that talent on digital came from other professions or other educations that beyond digital. So that's another thing that, for example, this new technology is more friendly a lot to other educations backgrounds. So this is one of the very important challenge, the talent. And another one is culture. Culture in public sector. I would use the sentence from Peter Drucker that say that culture eats strategy at breakfast, and that's absolutely true. So that's something that we have to deal. There is a culture overall in the public administrations entities. Of course, they are concerned about their people, their talent, especially with this situation that we live here. Of course, they even are more concerned about that. But that something has to change, because once they understand the value added even for their organization for data collaboration and these systems, this will help overall all of us. So this is something, the culture also, it's something that takes a long time to change, but again, and everything else, we are doing some things that will help, and especially to make it easy to see the benefits of the utilizations of these technology to the public entities.
Merci beaucoup. Before we move to the audience questions, I still have two questions I want to ask you. On the one hand, Gianfranco, all roads, yes, used to lead to Rome. Now they seem on data spaces to lead to Brussels, based on a mosaic of local efforts. on law enforcement, on agriculture, on health, on skills, on cultural heritage. I could go on and on. I think there are 14 or 15. I'll not take the risk to forget one. Basically here, we see that local forces based on national data hubs, labors, etc., are joining up with a catalyst that is Brussels in regards to EU data spaces. What can we expect from those data spaces? Do they accelerate data sharing in public sector? What is your view? Can you enlighten us?
And perhaps for some in our audience, we also need to explain for a second what a data space is. That is nothing more but a modern model for doing data sharing that is intrinsically sovereign and decentralized. Sovereign meaning that the whole stack from the technology up, including the processes and the legal terms by which this kind of environment operates, respect profoundly the rights of the organization involved or the privacy of the people. While the decentralized element is something that, as you can imagine, Europe is very, very, let's say, attached to. That is the idea of not creating a new, let's say, monopolist in data, in the data economy. That is part of the problem we need to protect ourselves from at the moment. So you bring all of this together and you have this model of data spaces that Europe is promoting heavily. And the initial supporting action are, as you were saying, based sector by sector. So each of many, not all of sectors, have been supported at the moment by Europe to try experiment data sharing in those spaces. And it's not just Europe, by the way. France and Germany have direct funding programs to actually keep experimenting and putting resources into the work. We just held an event in Den Haag, the very first of a project that we run for the European Commission called Data Space Support Center. And that's the idea, coordinating these 14, 20 different data spaces so that we keep the rhythm, we help them develop together, and we also define those kind of standards and processes that will soon enough, hopefully, create a common ground between them. By the way, we talk about sectors, but it's a bit misleading if you think about it, because a good data sharing environment does not really have boundaries. We should not worry if we are sharing with France or Germany, or if we are sharing between automotive and public sector and health. The idea is that we can ensure the privacy and the sovereignty of the organizations and the security of the data sharing processes, while enabling those kind of elements that either develop better services to citizens on one side, that is the interest of public sector, or let's say the data economy for the European citizens. I could talk for a very long time, but it's better if I stop here.
So many thanks for this sharp answer. Scott, the last answer from my side is about emerging stakeholders. You actually mentioned already the students. My question would be, especially in a time where like the pandemic, but also beyond, what emerging stakeholders, players do you see, thinking of home care, for example, but also other fields? Do you see beyond, for example, the relevance of startups or smart citizens sharing their data? Could you elaborate on that?
And I mentioned before the kind of new data strategy we've got for Scotland on that very topic. And that's all at the heart of it. So that there is definitely something about how we better partner with industry. And so startups is a good example, but I think what industry in its widest sense, and certainly for the work we do in Public Health Scotland, the kind of partnership word is really, really key, that, we're not going to do all of this kind of turning around Scotland's health on our own. So it's really important that we work across the system. So I think the startups, industry in general is really, really important. I think the one thing I would say that we've not been great so far at doing is when we do a bit of innovation. So we have an innovation challenge and particular projects around that. We're not always great at then scaling it up to kind of cover the totality of the country or other sectors. It tends to be kind of relatively niche and usually generally very successful in those niche areas, but we're not great at then learning and applying it elsewhere. So I think there's definitely more we can do in that space. And the public's a really interesting one, all about, as you say, sharing data. So many of us have our smart watches and such like, measuring our heart rates and all of that. So there's certainly some thinking around how we go about potentially using that and harnessing it. There is a big issue though about digital inclusion and making sure that we're not leaving people behind when we start thinking in that way. And there is kind of, I guess, an emerging view that often the people that have got the smartphones and the smartwatches and all of that are often the people who are already keeping an eye on their heart rate and their step count and all of that kind of stuff. And so we have to find ways of kind of targeting people who might not have the ability to buy a smartwatch, or maybe aren't as interested in what it means for their broader health. So I think there's a whole lot of challenges there about kind of how we get the citizen engaged. And we're certainly thinking about that at the moment in the context of COVID. And as I say, we had huge engagement with our daily statistics that went out on COVID, accessing the data like we've never seen before. People really interested in what was happening. And I guess the nature of the pandemic was people were really keen to know what was going on in their local neighbourhood. And what we're thinking about is how do we harness kind of what we did with COVID to other public health challenges like smoking, alcohol, obesity, kind of how do we get that same level of traction? So we're just trying to think through kind of how we do that. And there's certainly something about technology and how we share what we've got. So we've made good use of dashboards. In COVID, just a wee story. My mum, who's not tech savvy at all, used to phone me up on a Sunday to tell me all the latest stats for her area about COVID. I think forgetting that I'm the one that produces those stats, so I did actually know what it was. But the very fact my 70-year-old mother could log on and recite back to me the stats about what was happening was a huge step forward from where we've been in the past. And we typically used to publish things in PDFs and Excel, which are not particularly accessible. So we're really looking at kind of how we build on what we learned in COVID to get that citizen engagement. This feels like a topic we could probably talk about for hours, so I'll pause there, just aware of the time, but it's a really important part of the work that we're doing. Thanks.
Perfect. Yes. No, merci beaucoup. And let's actually now go to question and answers from the audience. I picked a few. Let's be really sharp in the answer. My first question would be from someone from the audience, Yasmin. In regards to cyber, opening up to data sharing brings also, of course, a vulnerability. And actually here, Yasmin, I can echo you. It's something we heard about an army telling us we want to cooperate with startups, local startups, but that means also having a cyber resilience to be protected by doing so and by opening up. How do you see that? How to deal with the cyber resilience while opening up to data sharing? Who wants to have 1-2 sentences on that?
Maybe just really quickly, just to highlight that it's hugely important. It's a great question. So my role in Public Health Scotland as well has been the lead for data and analytics, and I'm also the cyber lead as well. So it kind of all goes hand in hand. So the whole information governance, how we manage all of that, and there are very stringent frameworks that we have to operate behind in Scotland to safeguard all of that. The other thing I would say is that in terms of how we manage and process the data, what typically happens though is that what we call the payload, which is the bits that identify people, and the rest, which is more about why you were in hospital and kind of what you were doing, are kept separate. So even if there was an attack and people got hold of data, it would be very difficult to join up the citizen part of it with the kind of more detail. So that's a really important thing about kind of how we manage and store data in that context. But it's a huge important area that we keep an eye on all the time. And the one thing that might keep me awake at night is that very question that's just been asked. So it's hugely important. Thank you.
Okay, Pierre, can I add something?
Sure.
Okay, well, not only the cybersecurity, but also I think in Europe we have the GDPR, which really help us on using the data that we collect for the purpose we collect, and that is absolutely crucial. And this on the contract of confidence between, not confidence, in trust. Between the stakeholders and the public sector, for example, that collects a lot of data. So that is absolutely also important. And I know to implement all the GDPR rules, it takes a lot of money and time also. And it takes, but it's absolutely crucial to make sure that to the citizens and company and society in general, that we use the information in a good way. Of course, in terms of cybersecurity, as Scott said, we we have to implement lots of, which is also for small companies and big companies and public entities. And the legacy system is here again a challenge to do that, but it's something that we cannot avoid.
Perfect. I have another question in regards to, are there already front runners? Are there data organizations or data spaces that are more mature than others, from agriculture to health to law enforcement? Gianfranco, you have a good benchmarking perspective on that.
We will have it soon, because part of the responsibilities of the project I named earlier, the Data Space Support Center, will be to measure the contribution of the whole data spaces program to the data economy. Colleagues of ours in Belgium are literally taking the picture so that we can check again 1 year from now and 3 years from now. And again, this is not supposed to be judging the data spaces of the sector. It is more to help them. It's more of a race to the most of the opportunity rather than comparing if agriculture is better than smart cities or anything. And that is the spirit of Europe doing this kind of assessment even before data sharing. Many of you may know the Open Data Maturity Report that for many years now has been assessing how the governments across Europe were implementing their open data program specifically. This is useful because it creates material and learning elements by which each of the parties involved can learn from the others, and that's the spirit. So we will have that assessment soon, and it's not a race.
Yes, perfect. And last but not least, a question from Bas, and I'll transform it a bit here. In this case, it's Data Act, DMA, AI Act. There are a lot of regulations and acts. There are a lot of rules, GDPR as well. They ensure compliance. Some would say as well that they slow down the process or slow down data sharing. And this workshop of mine where someone said the safe option is to not share was exactly motivated by that thought. How to make concretely the safe option to share, because it's the more expressive, the more impressive, beneficial to all way. Do you have some quick, easy ways to explore, like a charter or a reskilling? What would for you be the last word on that for the future and the next steps?
I can take it quickly. Scott, you go first.
If you're thank you. No, that's a really good question. It's something I hear quite a lot, actually, that it's easier to say no than to do a lot of this stuff. So just an observation I would make is that actually people often think the legislation is there to kind of strangle us being able to do anything, but actually it was the point Teresa was making about actually legislation's there so that we can give the confidence and trust to citizens that we're doing the right things with data. And what we encourage in my organisation anyway is that we involve the data protection, information governance, those types of people right at the start of what we're doing, because often what happens is they get involved towards the end, and then towards the end you discover there's a whole load of things that you haven't done that you should have done, and then it becomes the impression that everything's getting blocked because of information governance. But if you involve them at the start, and it's more of a kind of can-do, how do we work within what we're allowed to do with the legislation, it's amazing how things can progress. So I'd maybe just push back a wee bit that actually the legislation is there for a reason. It's to keep things safe. That whole trust thing is really important. But actually, if we involve the right people at the right time, we can make a lot more progress than I think people recognise. And just as a quick example, around the COVID times, we were able to enact a whole load of innovation, a whole load of data sharing, a whole load of activity in what I would say rapid time during COVID, because people were committed to kind of addressing the pressures of the pandemic. And one of the things that we're trying to do is just to make sure that we don't revert back to the old ways of everything taking an absolute eternity to make progress, when we can learn about some of the tips and techniques we did in COVID. So I would just maybe pause there. Thank you.
I'll add a quick one, Pierre. There's a very easy trick, a pattern, I believe, that we find when organizations start with data sharing, public sector and non, that is having a good use case. I mean, actually, it connects well with what Scott has just said. unfortunately, big emergency, big health emergency, everybody has a very good reason to change something. And if you have a clear use case you're working towards, in a way, everything comes as a consequence of that. You will pick the technology that works for that, not more, not less. You will pick the security that is fit for that. You will identify the stakeholders that are really needed, and everything focuses in a way in one direction.
Yeah, I completely agree with Georgina and also Scott on there is no shortcut for security, and legislation a lot of time is a pain, but by using some experience, some use case before, we can kind of have a faster starter. So I think we have to go through there, and especially when we're talking about security and data protection, we should not go easy on that. That's my point of view. Otherwise, we're going to pay later.
Merci beaucoup. And I think we can actually now close. We're already a bit on top. So thanks a lot for having joined. I see as well on our parallel WhatsApp feed that there were actually over 2,000 views at some point. So very nice to hear that. It's really good for us to see that sharing actually is a way to also gain discussion traction in that field across borders and across sectors. Thanks a lot, Teresa, Scott, and Gianfranco for having been my discussion partners today. As a host, I talk too much. Therefore, I will definitely close now the panel. Thanks a lot again. Thanks for all the viewers that joined us to brainstorm around those topics. And obviously, for the questions that were not answered, do not hesitate to reach out at least to Gianfranco and myself so that we can answer those. And I'm pretty sure, Scott, Teresa, if cyber keeps us and keeps you awake at night, let's just continue that with a night podcast or conversation. I'm sure we will have something to talk about. So have a great day, everyone. Au revoir and see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.